Yo, what's good my great sages? It's your host Sage D Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new what if, this being the what if movie to what if Tatsumi was Yoriichi's reincarnation. I want to start this off by saying thank y'all so much for being here. I really do hope you guys do enjoy yourselves, as today we're going to see exactly how things would go if the strongest demon slayer in history had all his skills and experiences transferred over to the world of Akame ga Kill. As now with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different, man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
So to begin the what if, we're now going to begin with Tatsumi's origins. So dating way back all the way up to the date of Tatsumi's birth, we will see something very particular happen. As during that very same time as Tatsumi would be born into his village, we will see that deep within his soul, we will see the very soul of the strongest demon slayer in history's soul awaken. As this will be Yoriichi, as he will be awakened at the very same time that Tatsumi would be born. But you see, due to this happening, he wouldn't have all his memories, and instead he would slowly regain them as he grows up. Now for the rest of Tatsumi's origin story, although we don't really know too much about it, it would mostly play out the same way, with Tatsumi being extremely gifted since a young age, as he's literally shown his village that he's truly not like the rest of them. But sooner or later we would then see Tatsumi then leave his village along with his childhood friends. As you see, the current thing is the fact that Tatsumi's village was low on funds, so they wanted to help it by working for the Empire. So with that, we will then see Tatsumi and the rest of his friends then leave to work for the Empire, which by the way, in this timeline, Tatsumi ends up leaving with a regular katana instead of the standard long sword that he had in the main timeline. But besides that, Tatsumi's appearance would remain the same. As now, turning to Tatsumi as he was leaving the village, we would then get a good look at his memories. As you see, going through them, we will see that he doesn't have all his old memories yet, but he does remember a good amount of them, including learning a little bit of his old breathing style, and mostly more focused on just simply keeping his emotions in check, causing him to be much more calm and relaxed compared to how he was in the main timeline. And for those wondering exactly what Tatsumi had learned about his old breathing style, basically all he remembered was the first technique of sun breathing, and that was just it. He doesn't know anything else about it, just yet at least. But still, turning back to Tatsumi for the rest of his adventures, we see Tatsumi and his friends soon get separated, causing Tatsumi to travel alone for a little while before eventually reaching the Empire's capital, after getting a little help from travelers nearby that he saved from an earthworm. Now when Tatsumi ends up arriving at the capital, at first he has no clue about exactly how to get started on working for the Empire, which leads him to meeting Leone, who ends up eventually robbing him of most of his money, as Tatsumi in this timeline was smart enough not to waste his money that he was going to use for food and a place to stay. As soon after, Tatsumi would end up leaving the bar that Leone would rob him at, as instead he ends up looking for a hotel to stay at for the night, only for him to then encounter a noble girl who would offer him a place to stay, this being her place. As now following right after that will be most of the events that ended up happening after this point would play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, with the biggest difference here being the fact that Tatsumi throughout the time of his stay with the family would be incredibly suspicious of them and be very reserved with his actions. And the main reason for this is because of the fact that thanks to him being Yoriichi's reincarnation and thanks to his training back at his village, Tatsumi's senses were enhanced, which means he was obviously able to follow the smell of blood that was following the family throughout the entire day. As this will continue on all the way until the very moment that Night Raid would then commence their attack. As now turning to Tatsumi, we will then see him currently right now being awake, as he would actually smell the scent of blood throughout the mansion increasing, causing him to act. As after looking over the entire mansion and zipping past multiple rooms, he eventually ends up finding the young noble girl and decides to take her to safety until both of them would then encounter Akame. As then soon after encountering Akame, we will then see Tatsumi have no choice but to face off against her, surprising both her and Leone, who would arrive later to see the fight, as Tatsumi would actually be able to match Akame in both speed and skill. As in this fight, Tatsumi will be lasting way longer than he did in the main timeline, and surprisingly to both Akame and Leone once again, he would actually be improving, all the way until the end of the fight. As you see, after exchanging blades once again, as Tatsumi would be increasing his speed, with Akame trying her best to match up to him, this is when Tatsumi, in a very brief instant, only after getting a small glimpse of Yoriichi's memories, as he had regained a little bit more of his memories during the fight, he would be able to deflect Akame's blade out of her hand. And this will caught her so off guard that she actually ends up freezing mid-battle, causing Tatsumi to then see the opening. As we then see Tatsumi almost kill Akame as he ends up using his first breathing technique, only to stop himself right before he can actually dealt the blow. As after coming to the realization that he already beat Akame after he deflected the blade out of her hand, this is when Tatsumi would then decide to ask both her and Leone exactly why they were attacking the family. Now this will cause the two of them to snap out of their shock about the fact that Akame lost a fight against a stranger, as is when they would then reveal exactly what the noble family was doing to commoners and foreigners. As Leone moving incredibly fast, with Tatsumi being able to track her, she would then arrive at the warehouse as she ends up punching through the doors, causing Tatsumi to then get a good look at it. And while he was doing this, the noble girl that was trying to get away would then begin to crash out as she begins to try to justify the reasons as to why she was doing it, revealing her malicious nature. And of course, Akame and Leone seeing this would then prepare to kill her until Tatsumi, after seeing his friends dead, would without hesitation kill the noble girl, surprising both Akame and Leone once again by his speed, as he had moved so fast. And not only that, but he didn't release any bit of killing intent. They made it impossible to track his movements. As right after Akame would end up snapping out of her shock, she would then ask Tatsumi exactly how he was able to do that, as she had not been able to track him or sense his bloodlust or really do anything about it. And Tatsumi would then state in a very hollow-like tone that she was already dead, as he already considered her dead the minute that she spoke. He already considered her dead before his blade even struck her down. As after all, why should Tatsumi feel any bit of malicious intent towards someone who, in Tatsumi's eyes by that point, was long gone? As soon after those events were over, this is where Tatsumi would then be taken by Night Raid, as both Akame as well as Leone had saw major potential in him, and due to that they decided to take Tatsumi along with them. As after Tatsumi is taken back to their base, this is when they give him a whole breakdown about what their intentions are, as well as the corruption happening across the entire empire. And after very careful consideration, Tatsumi would then decide to join Night Raid, as he ends up becoming their very next group member. Also, a little bit of a PS, Tatsumi did make sure to bury his friends, so that way they're able to pass away peacefully. As now with that being said, this is where we now end up doing a time skip. So now flashing forward to the first couple of weeks after Tatsumi ends up joining Night Raid, we end up seeing him get sent on his first few missions in order to prove himself to the group, showing the members his skill with the blade and also surprising them greatly. As during that time, Tatsumi has been shown training with Night Raid as well as connecting with them, causing the members to get a better understanding of his character and also causing Akame to deeply respect and also admire Tatsumi, as he was actually very much proving that he was honestly much more skilled in the blade than her, as the only reason that she hasn't beat most of the time is because of the fact that she's just faster and stronger than him, as she has been doing this business of assassination and everything for a very long time. As after that, most of the events that play out during this point will play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, all the way up to the point where it's time for them to hunt down Zenkyu, the executor. Now turning to the specific night, we will then see Tatsumi along with the rest of Night Raid, as they're shown currently right now hunting down Zenkyu in different parts of the capital, with Tatsumi being the very first one to encounter him at a nearby park and having no choice but to fight him. As due to the training he received along with his natural talent, Tatsumi is able to beat Zenkyu rather easily. As turning to the scene, we end up seeing Tatsumi as currently right now he'll be dodging Zenkyu's attacks, as he will be there wondering exactly who was this guy, as he has met occasional assassins here and there, but all of them have failed. But this is the very first one that actually seems to be giving him a challenge. But this is when Tatsumi, as he was dodging Zenkyu's attack, using the first breathing style, he would then actually get in between Zenkyu's guard and actually cut up both his arms, as Zenkyu would scream out in pain only for his head to be chopped off in the same split instance. As right before he ends up dying, Tatsumi ends up telling him that it didn't matter which member he faced off against, this would always be the outcome, as this ends up bringing a very quick end to the mission. As now with the mission taken care of, we can now time skip to a couple of days after it. As you see, we now end up seeing Tatsumi once again, as throughout this time, he would just simply be training as well as connecting with each member, as the time would go on, all the way up until his very next mission, where unlike in the main timeline where Tatsumi would be accompanying Leone, in this timeline, Tatsumi would be accompanying Shelly in this mission. As now, doing a very quick change of scenes, we end up seeing both Tatsumi and Shelly after completing their mission now, as they'll be currently right now returning back to the base. But you see, as they were making their way to the base, this is when they would then encounter Suryu, the girl with the guns if you guys are not knowing this, and also her Tengu, Kudo, which again, if you guys don't know this, it's the dog. As this is where Suryu then proceeds to attack both Shelly as well as Tatsumi while declaring that it was for the name of justice. As we now end up turning to the very beginning of the fight, where we end up seeing Tatsumi as he'll be currently right now keeping Suryu distracted, all the while Shelly would take on Kudo. As she had more experience as she was the senior member here, so she wanted to protect Tatsumi while also making sure that he ends up getting the weaker of the two, as she knows that the Tengu was going to be the most dangerous one. So while Shelly is facing off against Kudo, we will see Tatsumi as he just basically easily is showing Suryu exactly why he was part of Night Raid, as he ends up deflecting all her bullets and everything while moving at such a breakneck speed that Suryu is not able to keep up. As this is when Tatsumi would then say the words of sun breathing, first style dancing, as he ends up immediately moving with such finesse and such speeds that Suryu is not able to react, as Tatsumi is able to actually destroy the guns that she had, cutting them apart, and soon is actually able to stab her directly through the shoulder, causing her to scream out in pain as Tatsumi would then kick her away. Now she ends up getting up, of course, as this is when she would then reveal that she actually had some augmentations to her body, as she ends up showing that her hands actually counted as guns as well, as she begins to unload an entire clip directly at Tatsumi, to which once again he's able to dodge out of the way using the breathing technique. As this fight would go on for quite a while, with Tatsumi being able to keep up with Suryu's relentless attacks before he's actually able to put her out the fight temporarily, knocking her down with a very quick slash to the back and causing her to lose focus and be on the ground trying to get back up. But you see, as Tatsumi would do this, this is when he would then break his attention away from her to then turn to that of Shelly, as he ends up seeing Shelly get quickly overwhelmed by Kudo as he had entered his berserk state after Shelly had cut both of his arms, as he ends up regrowing them very quickly and ends up punching Shelly away as she ends up getting into a near-death state after that. As Shelly would be there, she prepares for her death as Kudo will be approaching her preparing to eat her. This is when Tatsumi would then rush in to save her life at the nick of time. But while doing this, Tatsumi has left himself wide open for Suryu, who had finally gone back up, as she ends up revealing to have a hidden gun as she ends up shooting Tatsumi in the back. And this caused Shelly to scream out in horror as Tatsumi ends up rolling on the ground, wincing in pain. As by this point now, it was looking as if this was the end of the two, as Shelly ends up apologizing to Tatsumi as she prepares to activate her trump card, using her Tengu to make a generous flashing light so that way Tatsumi is able to get away. But right before she's able to do that though, this is when Tatsumi would then suddenly get up, as he seems to be in a very dazed state. Now Shelly seeing this would try to call out to Tatsumi, telling him to snap out of it, as Kudo was now rushing at them, but this is when suddenly Tatsumi would then turn to him, and right in a flash, Tatsumi would end up destroying both of Kudo's arms. As for some weird reason, we would actually see that in the area where Kudo's arms were, you can see that his arms almost look like as if they were burned off, as they will land down to the ground with a burning sensation, as you can literally see smoke rising from the cut areas. As Kudo ends up, backing away in complete shock, this is when it would then be revealed that by this point, once again, Tatsumi had regained more memories of his old life, as this ends up causing him to have some type of power up. As Tatsumi ends up getting memory of Yoriichi, and more precisely of a breathing technique. As now after getting this memory of this breathing technique and also getting in this daze, this is when Tatsumi would then soon be able to defeat and kill both Suryu and Kudo by himself. As now turning to the scene, we will see Tatsumi as he'll be there in the dazed state as he ends up releasing a very deep breath from his mouth. And Suryu, seeing that he was not moving, would then begin to once again use her hidden gun to shoot Tatsumi a bunch of times, with Tatsumi actually dodging out the way every single time, just moving his body slightly to do so. As this is when Tatsumi would then utter the words, "Sun breathing, second form," as moving so fast that not even Suryu or Kudo can react, he would then appear right beside the two of them as he ends up saying the words, "Clear blue sky." As right after saying this, he ends up swinging his blade so fast so fast that Shelly couldn't even react, and so fast that Tsuyu and Kudo had no chance to block it or really do anything. He ends up using this technique in order to decapitate the both of them in an instant, as both heads of both Tsuyu as well as Kudo will be sent flying in the air, with Kudo's body collapsing down to the ground, with both of them having a shocked expression on their face being the last expression that they will ever make. As Tatsumi would be there with a dazed look on his face, as this is when suddenly he would then collapse down to the ground, as Shelly would be there screaming out Tatsumi's name, as we end up doing a little bit of a time skip. Now flashing forward, after the two of them had been awake, we end up seeing Tatsumi as he ends up helping Shelly, as both of them end up returning back home and reporting about the events that went down. Now Night Rider would immediately check on their injuries as they immediately begin to patch them up, while also scolding them for pushing themselves too hard and not escaping any sooner. But then soon after, this is when they would then celebrate their safe return, as after that they would then actually have like a little bit of a party, and more precisely like a feast. And while this was going on, this is when Mine, for the first time ever, would actually show proper respect and gratitude towards Tatsumi, as even though he had been very calm and respectful, she just simply felt that he was not cut out for this life. But after seeing just how far he was willing to go for comrades, Mine had deeply respected Tatsumi and was obviously very grateful to him. And not only that, but looking towards Tatsumi mentally, after that mission, Tatsumi ended up learning exactly how likely he is to lose a comrade in this line of work. And this caused him to want to grow even stronger to prevent that, while also causing him to want to learn more about his old life, in order to reach even higher levels of strength. As now with those thoughts plaguing Tatsumi's mind, this is where we're once again able to do another time skip. So a few weeks has passed since the battle that happened between Tatsumi and Shelly versus Tsuyu and Kudo. We see Tatsumi has been training non-stop, pushing his talents and his body to the limit in order to protect his comrades, with him growing so strong that he's able to be a Kame with low difficulty in spars, surprising her and everyone, concerning the fact that Kame was known as the training freak. But what was also surprising about this point was the fact that during this point Tatsumi still hasn't gotten a Tengu for himself, and he hasn't awakened any new memories yet. While yes, he still ends up knowing about the breathing style, and while yes, he still ends up having the two techniques to which he's training to master them, he still hadn't awakened anything else from his memories, as even after pushing both his talents and his body to the limit, he still hasn't gotten anything from it. So this caused Tatsumi to wonder exactly what triggers these memories to awaken, but still regards to that, there was nothing he could do for now. Just simply train until he's able to protect his comrades. As now turning to a very particular day, as we now turn to when Tatsumi and Bulan get sent on a mission. During that time, we will see them while being on the mission then get ambushed by two members of the Empire, with Bulan being familiar with both of them. As then soon after, we will then see the four of them then begin to fight, as in this timeline we would actually see Tatsumi be able to hold his own and defeat his opponent for the first part of the fight, and Bulan doing the same thing. But then soon, all that would then change as the two members would then bring out their trump card. Now their trump card will cause them to get enhanced strength, as this is when Tatsumi would then be seen protecting Bulan from getting poisoned by the blood darts. But you see, while he was doing this also left him wide open, as the other member, which seemed to take a serum that made him extremely buff and extremely strong, he ends up actually badly wounding Tatsumi, and as he ends up getting hit with a powerful attack, an attack so strong that it actually leaves him bloodied and bruised, and nearly to the point of fading into unconsciousness, as Bulan would now be all by himself, forced to face off against the other member, while also being weakened, considering the fact that he did take some damage earlier to the fight against the other member. But you see, just as things were about to turn into an even worse situation, as it seems as if Bulan was about to get killed, this is when suddenly, ginormous amount of flames would then begin to erupt, making an entire flaming tornado, as this would end up catching the attention of the two that were fighting, as Bulan ends up sending a weak smile in the direction of Tatsumi as he'll be revealed. He'll be revealed there standing while also wielding his newly formed Tengu. As now doing a little bit of a flashback, we end up seeing Tatsumi right before he ends up falling into unconsciousness, as right now he's basically like nearing the edge of it. His vision is nearly completely dark, with him only seeing a small glimpse of Bulant and the other members fight, and currently right now he's just on his very last breath as he feels his eyes grow heavier and heavier. But while he was about to fall into unconsciousness, this is when suddenly he would then begin to regain more memories about his life, including fighting with some demons, as these memories would give his will even more power. But you see, due to Tatsumi getting fueled by these memories, this is when something interesting would happen. As you see, the katana that Tatsumi has been carrying around this entire time, we will then see it also begin to change colors. As usually it was just a regular black color, nothing special, nothing really different about it, but then we will then see it change its colors to that of a red one, as the blade itself had turned red, as it would be pretty similar to what Yoriichi had in his old life. As almost immediately after awakening this blade, this is when suddenly flames begin to erupt from it, as these would be actual flames, as this blade had the ability to create flames and make the flame effects of the breathing style become real. As with this flame, Tatsumi ends up erupting from a flaming tornado as he ends up revealing the new weapon. As now with the new weapon fueling him as well as his old memories, this is when Tatsumi would then be able to kill the final member. As we end up setting the scene, we see Tatsumi as he ends up erupting from the flames, as he ends up approaching them with a relative pace, like he's just simply walking while making sure to point the sword at the man's direction. Now when the man sees Tatsumi, he ends up laughing as he ends up immediately backhanding Bulant out the way, as Bulant will end up getting sent flying but still conscious and still alive. As is when he would then rush at Tatsumi, letting him know that nothing has changed, considering the fact that Tatsumi still had the injury from earlier. But yet even as this man was approaching, Tatsumi was calm, almost as if he was just simply walking to school. As right as the man was about to land a dangerous blow into Tatsumi's face, he would then vanish. As all of a sudden the man begins to feel pain in his side, then to his back, then to his arm, then to his leg, as he begins to feel slash marks across his entire body, as these marks will be burned into it, causing even more pain, as he begins to scream out in pure agony, as Tatsumi just continue appearing and disappearing, landing slash marks all around, as he would then finally appear right in front of the man. As the man would look at Tatsumi with tears in his eyes as he tries to attack him one last time, this is when Tatsumi would then suddenly utter the name of the new technique. Sun breathing, third form, raging sun. As now turning to the man right after he threw his attack, as right as the attack was about to hit Tatsumi, this is when suddenly he would then gain 2 large slash marks across his body. As these marks would hit him so hard, they actually sent a shockwave throughout the entire area. As suddenly everything will go still for a moment as Tatsumi stares at him coldly, as this is when the man would then suddenly begin to actually break down. As by break down, I mean he literally breaks down. His body was cutting up like sushi, as he ends up literally collapsing down to the ground, chunks of him all over, as Bulan would be there in the corner watching all of this with a weak smile on his face, proud to see just how strong Tatsumi had became, until suddenly he ends up falling into unconsciousness, with Tatsumi doing the same thing, as similar to the events that happened with Shelly, it was happening again. As the last thing that Tatsumi would think about in his mind would be the fact that he still had so much more to learn, as he ends up closing his eyes and slamming his back hard against the ground, falling into unconsciousness. As this is where we end up doing another time skip as well as a change of scenes. Now turning to right after the battle, we end up seeing Tatsumi as he soon ends up waking up, but not at the ship anymore. Instead, he'll be back at the base, as he ends up seeing that both him and Bulant had healed from the battle, as apparently the members of Night Raid had found them and taken them back to the base to recover. And speaking of Night Raid, right after finding out that Tatsumi had awakened, they would actually bust up into his room and immediately begin to scold him for his actions. As while yes, he most definitely was impressive during the mission, and while yes, he technically did complete it, at the same time, they risked their lives more than they needed to, as if the fight was too overwhelming for them, they should have just escaped. As this is when they would then tell him to be way more careful of himself, as they also tell him that they were glad to see that he was alive. And right after everything would settle down, as Tatsumi would thank them for their concerns and also apologize to them, this is when Tatsumi would then also be presented with his new Tengu, this being his katana. But you see, the thing is, this Tengu was so unknown that a name for it didn't exist. So they decided that Tatsumi should be the one to name it. considering the fact that he was the one to awaken it. And due to Tatsumi being, now having the permission to name it, this is when he would then decide to name the Tengu after the technique that he actually learned just recently, this being Raging Sun. As now with that being said, this is where we end up seeing Tatsumi now have a Tengu, and not only that, but we also see him now growing even stronger than he was in the main timeline, as this is where we end up doing a time skip. So now flashing forward to a couple of weeks after the battle, we end up seeing Tatsumi after recovering, as he is told by Night Raid that he is forbidden from training and that it was time for him to take a break and have a relaxing day, to which he does so begrudgingly, as he decides that he was just simply going to do nothing more but to help out both Lubbock as well as Leone for the day, to which it was just a simple dinner run to go get supplies. But while the trio was doing this is when they would then encounter a nearby tournament, which seems to have an offer for a large amount of prize money. And seeing the opportunity, Leone tells Tatsumi to participate, while telling him that it was not considered training, considering the fact that he could easily beat everyone in the tournament, so it was okay. So with that being said, this is where we now turn to when Tatsumi is then participating in his first match. To which I'm not even going to describe the first match, it was very easy, as Tatsumi is able to defeat his opponent without even using a sword. And this actually ends up catching the attention of Esdev, as this was the tournament that was created for her. As after seeing Tatsumi's display of strength, as well as taking a liking to his appearance, this is when soon after the match was over, this is when Tatsumi was then declared the winner, as this is when Esdev then approaches him, put a collar on his neck, before dragging him away, cancelling the rest of the tournament. Now this ends up shocking everyone, especially both Leone and Lubbock, who know that they're going to get into so much trouble after this ends up getting out to the boss, especially considering the fact that they told Tatsumi to participate. So yeah, they were most definitely panicking. As now turning to Tatsumi once again, we end up seeing him as he currently right now ends up getting taken away by Esdev and gets introduced to her group. Now Tatsumi would be there, as basically right now he was just trying to figure out a way to escape, or better yet, maybe, just maybe, he could actually find a way to end all this right here right now, if he ends up killing Esdev and her group. But you see, the biggest problem with that is the fact that Tatsumi didn't bring his Tengu with him. As you see, the current thing, and honestly the very funny thing about that, was the fact that Tatsumi's Tengu was stuck with Leone. So yeah, basically his only weapon was gone. He can only resort to hand-to-hand combat, and even then Tatsumi was not 100% sure that he could take them on with just that. So due to that, Tatsumi ends up spending a lot of time with Esdev and her group, learning of their training and brutality when it came to taking missions, while also during this time learning more about Esdev and her way of living. As you see, during this time, Esdev has tried everything to get close to Tatsumi, whether it be trying to sleep with him, trying to take him out on dates, even though most of those dates were on a battlefield, and overall just trying to come to understand Tatsumi. But you see, the thing is, her understanding of Tatsumi was very warped. As you see, after seeing how easily Tatsumi had came to understand everything about her, she thought she was understanding him the same way, when really she did not know the first thing about him. As this ends up causing her to fall even deeper in love with him, as she ends up having this very weird delusion that Tatsumi was exactly like her, to which he most definitely wasn't. In fact, he was her complete opposite. But yet she continued feeding herself that delusion that he was like her, and that he was in love with her as well. However, luckily, on a certain day for Tatsumi, as he was sent along on a mission along with the rest of Esdev's group to take care of it, this is when he would then soon get the opportunity to get away, as he ends up slipping away from them with relative ease, as they were too preoccupied with everything else to really focus on him. As this allows Tatsumi to return back to his base and report back everything to Night Raid about everything he learned. And when Esdev found out that Tatsumi got away, she was extremely pissed off, as she decides to punish her group for letting him escape, unknowingly about the fact that she was the one to let him slip away from her eyes, as she was the one closest to him. So yeah, basically they were getting punished for no reason, but there's not really much they could do. But still, regardless of that, turning back to Tatsumi, we end up seeing him as he's currently right now completing his report, as the rest of Night Raid would end up telling him and asking him if he was alright and everything, only for them to suddenly then get attacked. as literally right after Tatsumi ends up returning back home, his base ends up getting attacked, as one of the Empire's top groups had located the base and decided to ambush them. Now the rest of Night Raid tried their best to escape, as Tatsumi as well as Lubbock decided to work together to get everyone to safety, with Lubbock using the traps that he set up to kind of slow them down, and Tatsumi using his Tengu to push them back, preventing them from getting close to the group. As even though they will shoot off their firearms and use any type of newly made weapons in order to try to get them, Tatsumi as well as Lubbock have been able to push them back, and the rest of the group had been able to escape rather safely. And if you're wondering, Tatsumi had actually learned the fourth form, as he had been able to create a wall of fire to stop them, using his Tengu of course. As right after the escape, we end up seeing Night Raid as well as Tatsumi, as they end up actually meeting the boss once again, as well as meeting two other members, this being Susanoo and Chelsea. As during the time of the escape, Tatsumi as well as Lubbock had gotten assistance from these two, as they end up pushing back the other forces, giving everyone even more of an opportunity to escape. As right after that, we would then see everyone then give off their introductions to each other, and Tatsumi would be there, smiling and everything to see that he was back home and to see that he was back with his group. But you see, due to this being a very long night and due to Tatsumi really just pushing himself way beyond his limit for today, this is where he would then begin to actually collapse down as he just rests for a little while, not really wanting to do anything else but simply close his eyes. But you see, while Tatsumi was resting, this is when Lubbock would then suddenly speak up, as he ends up telling the group with a very serious tone, which is very unlike him, that they need a meeting, as we now turn to it. So now turning to the scene, we will then see Night Raid, as they'll be sitting down, actually at a campfire, as Lubbock would be there, as currently right now the boss was looking for a new base, and she was distracted while the rest of Night Raid had just been there chilling. As Lubbock, after seeing Tatsumi push himself so hard after joining the group, and even protecting many of them from certain death, this is when he would then decide to talk about it to the rest of the group, telling them that they need to get stronger. It can't keep going on like this, as he would try to explain to them that by this point, unfortunately they're falling behind, and even though they do work hard and they do train as hard as Tatsumi is pushing himself so hard, it's harder than everyone else, that he's literally breaking down his body just to go ahead and help them. As Tatsumi seems to, feel more tired, you can often see him like wandering half the time or just like resting his body more often than most. And overall, Tatsumi spends most of his time just training and doing nothing else, as he literally begins to slowly but surely even stop connecting with the group to focus on completing assassination missions and to focus on growing stronger. Now this would cause the group to actually look down and feel disappointed, as by this point there was no argument to say that Tatsumi has not become the strongest member in Night Raid, as by this point they can't even deny the fact that he even surpassed Akame, as she would openly admit to the fact that Tatsumi had surpassed her long ago. And this will cause them all to realize that they were falling behind, as this made them realize that Tatsumi had long surpassed them, and not only that, but Tatsumi was honestly carrying them pretty badly, as both Shelly as well as Bulans would then look down, as remember the times that Tatsumi had saved them from certain death. As after coming to the realization about their faults, this is when suddenly all of Night Raid would then make an agreement that they will train themselves even harder. They didn't care if they have to double the training method or even triple it, as all that matters was the fact that they're able to keep up with Tatsumi and that he doesn't have to carry the rest of the team on his own, as the boy was pushing himself way too hard for someone of his age exactly. So due to that, all of them would then agree to it, as just like that, this is where we end up doing another time skip. As now turning to a couple of months after the entirety of Night Raid's base had been destroyed, we end up seeing something pretty amazing happen. As instead of just simply going back to a new base and going back to doing assassination missions, instead when they actually got back to a new base, they actually decided to dedicate the couple of months of just simply training and growing stronger. All of Night Raid decided to double down on their promise, as every last one of them had pushed themselves to the absolute limit, using both their talents and bodies and breaking the limits that was even there in the first place. And Tatsumi would be there joining them, but you see the thing is, he wasn't, as stressful as he was before. As after all, he was always in a hurry to grow stronger, but now he's actually able to go on at a regular pace, with all of Night Raid following along with him. As Tatsumi had given them advice here and there, after looking at his own fighting style and also after learning from his own breathing style as well, teaching them how to increase the lung capacity, allowing them to continue fighting for much longer, and also to give them a temporary boost of strength. He was helping every last one of them, as Tatsumi was also helping himself. As by this point, due to all the training he had gotten with the group and everything, this is where we'd actually end up finding out that Tatsumi by this point had actually regained nearly all his memories from his old life. As he didn't know exactly how it happened or why it happened, all he knew was that during the time of the training, slowly but surely he began to regain all those old memories much more frequently. And this allowed him to actually pick up on nearly all of the sun breathing techniques. Not all of them, but just most of them. As well as having master over a couple of them, and also mastering having control over his own senses. With this giving Tatsumi the ability to actually predict attacks and move much more swiftly in combat, causing enemies to not be able to hit him as easily as before. As now by this point, after Night Raid had finally done all its training, we would then see them then once again get sent on various missions. But you see, this time each member will be going out there on their own to complete it. Considering the fact that all of them have gained a major power boost, allowing them to take care of their missions by themselves, without a teammate. As we end up seeing Night Raid, due to taking mission this way, actually end up weakening the Empire even further. As now turning to the present, we actually end up seeing that Esdef's forces were now down to only 4 members left, as the rest of them had been killed off by Night Raid, as they made sure to take care of them swiftly. As if you guys are wondering, they're moving like the Akatsuki or the 13 court squads, as literally they are eliminating these threats before they can even rise. As now, due to eliminating all those guys, Esdef forces were now down to only Esdef, Kurumi, Wave, and Bolus. So yeah, basically she's just down to those 3 and also herself. As this ends up making things very difficult for the Empire, as many people were actually fearing about what's going to happen to them, considering the fact that the Jaguars were quite well known for being fearsome. But how fearsome are they with only 4 members? As now turning to the current point, we will see Tatsumi. As you see, he ends up returning back from a mission as he had completed it with relative ease, but while he was doing so, he ends up seeing Night Raid currently having a meeting, as they had finally gotten the opportunity to take down Esdef and her forces for the last time. As due to using her underground connections, as well as due to Chelsea working overtime, as in this timeline she doesn't get killed off in the way she was in the main timeline, this actually allowed Night Raid to find out where Esdef and her forces were much sooner, and allowing them to actually get the opportunity to ambush them. As the boss would then tell them to give it all they got, as they were not going to hold back anything when it came to taking down Esdef. This is when we would then see everyone in the group then train up for one more time, as this truly was going to be a battle to define all battles. As now turning to the very day, we end up seeing Night Raid as they would head off to the location where Esdef and her forces were located. As upon their arrival at the location, they'll end up spotting Esdef along with her forces, but you see the thing is she was currently wielding a small army, as they were currently right now keeping a lookout for Night Raid, while also taking care of a mission that didn't seem to be up for the other 4's status, allowing for the small army to do it. Now Night Raid seeing them would then get into position, every last one of them, as we see the group then split up, with half of them going to one side and the other half going to the other. As they end up waiting for the signal to erupt so that way they can get into action, this is when suddenly they will then see it, as a major explosion ends up getting let off, catching the attention of Esdef and her forces, and allowing for Night Raid on the other side to then attack. As this is where Esdef and her forces will end up seeing that half the small army that she gathered will be wiped out by Night Raid, as they end up brutally taking them down, even though these soldiers were most definitely armed and most definitely weren't just average foot soldiers. They were literally part of Esdef's small army. And Esdef, after spotting Night Raid, would then suddenly send out a feral smile, as this is when she would then tell her other 3 members to then join her, as they would then decide to make the charge. As this is where the battle between the 2 groups would then begin for the first time. As we end up seeing Night Raid as they end up taking down the other half of Esdef's army and mostly just focus on keeping them distracted, all the while we end up seeing 4 members of Night Raid then separate as they decide to go after Esdef and her 3 members. As the 4 that will separate will be none other than Akame, Bulant, Leone, and Tatsumi. As right after the four of them would then split up from the group in order to chase down Esdeath and her three members, this is where all of them would then face off against each other in different parts of the battlefield, with Akame facing off against Kurumi, and Wave facing off against Bulant, and Bolus versus Leone. All the while Tatsumi versus Esdeath would actually happen at the very center of the battlefield, as they were basically the main show. And although Akame wanted to fight Esdeath herself, she knew that Tatsumi had it handled, and not only that, but she wanted to be the one to take care of her sister, since after all, this was something that she felt she needed to take care of. As now that everyone had gotten their own fighting partners and everything, this is when the battle would then begin. As we now end up changing scenes, we end up seeing Tatsumi, as currently right now he'll be there in the middle of the battlefield as dust clouds and weapons and everything were getting sent flying, as the other members of Night Raid were keeping the others occupied, while the other three that were accompanying him went off to face off against their own opponents, leaving him here to face off against Esdeath. On the other end of the battlefield, we see Esdeath with a serious look on her face, but if you look very closely, we can see that she actually had a little bit of a blush on her cheek, as even though they had not seen each other for so long, and even though she knows that he's working for Night Raid, she just simply couldn't help herself. As this is when Esdeath would then tell Tatsumi that she didn't want it to be this way, with Tatsumi telling her that this was the only way it was gonna end. As hearing this, she would then actually look down for a few seconds before suddenly drawing her blade, telling Tatsumi that he better not disappoint her, with Tatsumi doing the same thing. We see both warriors face down each other for a few seconds before they would then vanish and then collide with each other in the center of the battlefield, with this collision causing a shockwave pushing back the other forces and causing them to be sent flying, as the battle between both Tatsumi as well as Esdeath would then begin. We see the two of them first start off with a little bit of a warm-up, as both of them would just exchange light blows here and there, as they were currently right now dancing with their blades, showing each other exactly what is intended for the future. As they continue dancing around with their blades, just exchanging blows here and there, this is when Esdeath would then get serious, as she then releases a rapid amount of strikes using her rapier, but while she was doing this, Tatsumi is able to use the breathing style of the first form to dodge out of the way, as he's able to completely maneuver out her attacks and even land her with a clean cut to her cheek. Now Esdeath will be there silent for a moment as she ends up feeling the stinging blow from Tatsumi's cut, but instead of actually, wincing or really showing any bit of pain, she actually begins to blush and even smile, happy to see that even after all this time, Tatsumi still shines. And this is why she needs to go ahead and freeze him to preserve that shine. As suddenly gaining a fairer look on her face, this is when Esdeath begins to blitz around the battlefield, moving in speeds that Tatsumi was surprised and caught off guard by, as she ends up appearing right behind him trying to stab him, only for Tatsumi to then surprise her as he's able to dodge out the way, and landing her with another slash, this time actually across the shoulder. As she's actually surprised by the fact that Tatsumi is able to keep up with her speed, as he ends up telling her that he can tell exactly where she's going, in typical anime fashion of course. And this will continue on for quite a while, as we end up seeing the two of them just simply disappear and then appear in different parts of the battlefield, clashing before disappearing once again, as they will continue doing this over and over again until once again Esdeath decides to take it a little bit further. Using her Tengu, she begins to freeze the battlefield, making it hard for Tatsumi to move as she continues actually, striking him down, landing him with a couple of blows, as even though Tatsumi was most definitely fast, in this slippery terrain it makes things very difficult, but yet he was still keeping up. Using his Tengu while also making sure to keep Esdeath at bay, soon Tatsumi is able to burn away all the ice, allowing him to gain footing and also creating a kind of smoke screen, this making it difficult for Esdeath to touch Tatsumi, as him, thanks to his enhanced senses, is actually able to sense her perfectly, as he ends up using this opportunity to land her with a dreaded fire wheel, as this ends up hurting her pretty badly as she ends up getting a nasty cut on her shoulder, although Tatsumi was sporting his own set of marks here and there. As both of them will be there staring down at each other, as Esdeath will be evaluating the blow as she actually feels the stinging pain and is actually forcing herself to grit her teeth, this is when she will then begin to actually chuckle, before making a sudden Joker-like laugh, as even though she was hurt, she was still enjoying the battle, as that's really all she cared about. As she ends up telling Tatsumi that they're going to have so much fun after she freezes him for all eternity, as this is when suddenly, as Tatsumi prepares for the attack that was coming, he would then feel a stinging pain in his shoulder. As suddenly, looking to the side, he would then see that his shoulder had been pierced by Esdef's weapon. As you see, somehow, someway, Esdef had moved so fast that Tatsumi had been unable to react. As she ends up smiling after seeing that she dealt damage to Tatsumi, as she ends up twisting the weapon, causing Tatsumi to grit his teeth as he separates from her quickly. But you see, just as he was thinking that he got away from her, she would then once again disappear and then appear once again, dealing him even more damage, as he feels her stab in his leg this time, making it hard for Tatsumi to move. And this will go on for quite a while, as she is just blitzing Tatsumi, like he's not able to react at all, as 1 minute she's in front of him, the next second she's literally right in his shoulder, in his leg, and basically she's just making sure to completely shut down Tatsumi, making him have no chance to dodge or fight at all. As now turning to the present, we see Tatsumi now currently right now standing on his last legs, or should I say knees, as he'll be currently kneeling on the ground, unable to move his arms as he has been stabbed in the shoulder by Esdef, as she made sure that Tatsumi can no longer swing a sword. Heck, she made it sure that he can't even move, as she stabbed him in both of his thighs, making it to where even like moving a little bit was like excruciating pain. As currently right now, Tatsumi was just literally on the brink of death right now, as Esdef had him at the palm of her hands. Tatsumi could feel ice begin to surround him as he feels himself begin to get stuck in a glacier of it, with Esdef telling Tatsumi that even though all this went down like this, that she would still care about him. As she says that she will make sure that he will be a work of art to be remembered by, and a work of art that was only meant for her eyes only. As basically she was going to trap Tatsumi with her for all eternity. And there was nothing that Tatsumi could do right now that could stop this. Or at least that was the case. But right as Tatsumi was closing his eyes to accept his fate, this is when suddenly he then gets hit with one last memory. As this will be the memory of an old man Yoriichi. As this will be him during his final moments. But you see, when you think of his final moments, you would think that they'll be filled with happiness and a bunch of other things like most people. But no, his final moments were nothing more but regret. Regret that he was gifted with all these talents. Regret that he had to use them to the fullest capabilities. But his biggest regret of all was never starting a family and basically never just living the normal life that he always craved and wanted. As if there was anything he wanted at all from any of it, he would be willing to throw away all his skills, his talents, his strength, just to live a normal life, just to start up a family and honestly be at peace. As with those final thoughts ringing in Yoriichi's mind, this is where we would then see Tatsumi then be given the final breathing technique. As we now turn back to the present, we see Tatsumi as currently right now he was about to get encased into ice, but you see while he was doing this is when suddenly a familiar marking would then appear right on Tatsumi's forehead. As suddenly flames begin to erupt to such an absurd degree that it immediately breaks the glacier that was going to be formed around Tatsumi that was going to trap him, and not only that, but begins to literally burn everyone that was close to them. Even Esdef herself actually had to back away as these flames were so hot that literally, even though she was not touching Tatsumi like at all, she literally was getting burned badly. As she ends up looking on in pure bewilderment about what was going on, as she ends up cursing before she then activates her Tengu's ability once again, freezing time itself in order to stop Tatsumi from doing any more, just so that way she can capture him. As she rushes over trying to stab Tatsumi one more time, this is when suddenly Tatsumi, in this very frozen space, would then creepily turn his head directly in her direction, while still being in the frozen space. As this will cause Esdef to be so shocked by this that the technique would actually shut down. As right as everything else was continuing on again and as time will flow freely once again, this is when Tatsumi would then disappear, as he ends up appearing in front of Esdef with his sword drawn. And Esdef not even being able to sense the attack and not being able to move out the way, she ends up getting a nasty cut on her shoulder, and then another one. But right before Tatsumi can attack again, once again time is frozen. As she tries to get away from Tatsumi while also trying to put him out of commission gently, this is when suddenly once again, in this frozen area where time is no longer moving, Tatsumi turns into her direction. And when she actually gets a good look at Tatsumi's eyes, she will see that all of it was just empty. There was no anger, sadness, happiness, nothing. It was just cold indifference. As she would be looking at them and wonder exactly what was going on in his mind, only to see that even now, after time is frozen, Tatsumi is moving. As he ends up blitzing Esdeath once again, and this time landing her with a nasty critical blow across her chest as she'll be blown back by it. As even though once again she was in excruciating pain, and even though she was literally on her last legs, she will be there smiling, so happy to see that the one that she cared about so much was reaching his full potential due to her. As Tatsumi would be looking at her once again with cold indifference, as this is when finally Tatsumi would then bring out his last technique. The last technique is sun breathing. As you see, this was a technique that Yoriichi never used before, mostly because of the fact that in his old life, no one was worthy, until now. As Tatsumi would then utter the words, sun breathing, 13th form. As right after saying these words, this is when Tatsumi would then suddenly blitz Esdeath, as he would then deliver her a ferocious set of blows, as you will see that in this 13th form, he would be using every last one of the sun breathing techniques, every last one in combination, creating a very deadly combo. As this form was so dangerous and the most powerful sun breathing form that there was, that legit there was literally no proper name for it. It was dubbed the 13th form, but there was no other name to follow it. As Esdeath will be taking the brink of this blow, but yet not once did she scream out in pain or in terror or really do anything like that. No. Instead, she just simply smiled with a blush in her cheeks as she was happy to be slayed by Tatsumi of all people. As right after the combo would be done, as we end up seeing Tatsumi deliver so many blows to the point where Esdeath's body is no longer recognizable, like her face is no longer recognizable as she only had one eye open. The last thing she would ever say to Tatsumi was, she doesn't regret a thing. As Tatsumi would be there looking at her as she just casually caresses his cheek, letting him know that even if she was gone, she would still be looking after him. As she would say this in a very deranged and also obsessive way. Although while Tatsumi says nothing more as he continues looking at her with an indifference look on his face, as he ends up slamming the katana directly through the chest, ending Esdeath. As now with Esdeath being defeated, we now end up turning to the rest of the night raid as we end up seeing all of them win their own battles. Akame is able to say a proper goodbye to Kurumi as she ends up saying farewell to her sister as she was the one to kill her. We also end up seeing Bulant as he ends up telling Wave that he truly was noble, as unlike the rest of them, Wave was not corrupted at all. But he ends up telling Wave that maybe, just maybe in another life, he will be fighting on the right side. And finally for Bolas, in this timeline, Leone decides not to kill him. And the main reason for that is because of the fact that while yes, Bolas has most definitely done a couple of things, at the end of the day, he didn't do it out of his own gain or anything like that. He did it for the Empire, and he mostly did it to sustain his family. As Bolas is literally already beaten up and everything, Leone with a new shed of dignity then tells him to leave and never come back, to which he would do so, obviously ready to take his family and just ready to quit the Empire itself. As literally Bolas to them is the fact that they think that Bolas is already dead, that man is gone. As now that they had taken care of the main members, turning to the rest of Esdeath's small army, we will see that the rest of the members in Night Raid actually took care of them. As just like that, they will then turn to Tatsumi as he ends up casually bringing his blade into the air, as suddenly every last one of the members in Night Raid would then cheer, as this battle right here had been their flawless victory. As this is where we now end up doing one last time skip. As now flashing forward to the years, we end up seeing the Empire once again, as by this point now it's been overthrown. As thanks to Night Raid's victory over Esdeath, the entire Empire basically was nothing more but a sitting duck, as even though the Administrator did have a secret Tengu on hand, it was simply not enough with the combined forces of Night Raid, especially now that they were extremely buffed. So due to that, they were able to take care of the Empire relatively easily, and they were trying to do their best to change it for the better. Every last one of the members had survived, and honestly, they can't help but be grateful for that, considering the fact that they nearly lost many of themselves during the time of them being revolutionaries. But you see, one thing was very important though. As the years would go by and everything, and as the entire Empire was changing for the better, we also see something else happening, new life being created. As now turning to Tatsumi, and in his final moments of this what if, we will see Tatsumi once again, as currently right now he would just be there sitting at a lake cabin. As you see currently right now, he kind of quit the whole forces. He no longer wanted to pick up a blade, he no longer wanted to be a swordsman. He did his job, he took care of Esdev, he already fought enough fights for a lifetime. As now he just simply wanted to retire. And honestly, after looking at that final old memory he had gotten from Yoriichi, he knew that he no longer wanted to live his life as he did before. As back then, the only reason why he grew stronger was to protect his friends. But now that the Empire was taken care of, everything was good. That meant that he could finally relax, he could finally rest. And also, after remembering all of Yoriichi's regrets, he decided to take advantage of his new life now to try to fulfill those regrets. As after all, he didn't want the same thing to happen to him. So now, turning to Tatsumi once again, as he ends up sitting there at the lake cabin, this is when suddenly we would then see a young boy looking similar to Tatsumi, with the simple fact that his eyes were different. As instead of having the same green eyes as Tatsumi, they would be red. As suddenly accompanied the boy would be none other than Akame, as yes, during those final moments of this what if, we will see that Tatsumi actually became a father. And not only that, but he also married Akame, who, after finally figuring out her own mental issues and everything, and Tatsumi helping her out, the two of them actually got together, living a life that was honestly pretty comfortable. Both of them retiring from the battlefield and now just living a life of comfort as they wait for the new generation. As we end up seeing for the very final moments of this what if, Tatsumi picking up his son and rushing over to Akame, as he basically ends up laughing and smiling with all three of them, as every last one of them would have a warm smile on their face, as that will be the last ending shot that we will get for this what if, as this will be the end to what if Tatsumi was Yoriichi's reincarnation. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this what if. This what if was taking a very long time. I don't know if you guys know this, but currently right now at my time it's 5:03 a.m. So yeah, your boy most definitely worked hard on this what if. It was difficult to say the least. I was trying to post it on Friday, but then I ran out of time, and then I tried posting it on Saturday, like today, but yesterday, and I ran out of time. But overall, I still kept trying, and yet here I am now, finally making the what if and posting it today. So I hope you guys do enjoy yourselves. It was a really fun ride. I do wish I made this what if much sooner, or I didn't have to stay up so late to make these what ifs. But honestly, I don't regret a thing, because I like making these what ifs. It's fun. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say, y'all. Honestly, I'm just dragging out time to really just yap for the sake of yapping. So with that being said, y'all, it's your host Seiji Samurai, and he's signing off. Peace and have a lovely day.
Colors, switch the color, 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 switch it, switch the color. Colors, switch the color, 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 switch it, switch the color.